ohio.org/jail voting. And at the bottom of that webpage, you can find all of our resources, including fact sheets, toolkits, checklists for organizers, and also this slide deck that I'm going to be going through right now. It just lives evergreen on our website. So you'll always be able to go there and find these slides if you would like to go back and review that material. Let me just get my side under control here, get everything set up. And then I will share my screen. Okay. So bear with me for just a moment. Okay, great. And also, just so you know, you may see me look off to the side here. I made some notes and I'm going to be reading. So if you see me looking over, that's what I'll be doing. So this is, like I said, the ACLU's jail voting kind of best practices, the legal foundation for what can and can't be done, and as well as the legal process for going through this. So first of all is why jail voting? Why are we here? Why is this important? Well, obviously it's important because in Ohio and in the United States of America, those who are eligible to vote, regardless of where they are stationed, should be able to exercise that right. We unfortunately do have a reality to where in Ohio and some other states, those who are currently convicted and incarcerated for a felony conviction cannot vote, but anybody serving time for a misdemeanor violation is eligible to vote. So it's always critical that we keep that at the forefront here. Also, by expanding our access, expanding everybody's access to the ballot, we ensure our democracy is strong. And we also want to educate these individuals about their right to vote and about the opportunities that are there for them. Moving on, I wanted to just kind of give you some basic knowledge about, the kind of the difference between jails and prisons and why that distinction is important in this area of election law. I alluded to it previously, but essentially jails are your more local county-based institutions that primarily hold individuals pre-trial, meaning they haven't even been convicted of a crime, they're still legally innocent, or also those that are serving time, a majority of them serving time for misdemeanors. There are some lower level felony offenders that are housed in jails. Typically that context is for drug-related offenses, but primarily misdemeanor offenders are the ones housed in jails and the ones who still have their right to vote. It's even more critical now that we are getting into these jails to register folks, because on a different piece of advocacy the ACLU is doing, we commissioned a report and found that on any given day in Ohio, over 60% of all people housed in our jails are there pre-trial. So they technically are innocent. They have not been convicted of a crime. So it's even more important that these folks have the ability to cast their ballot because they're still legally innocent. They still haven't been convicted of anything. And then on the other side, for prisons, that's where you have your more high-level offenders and primarily those who have been convicted for and incarcerated for a felony. So in Ohio, they actually have lost their ability to vote until they become or until they re-enter society and leave their incarcerated location. And this plays into Ohio's voting laws. So obviously we know here who's all eligible: US citizens over the age of 18 with at least 30 days of residency in the state in which they are planning to vote. And then also the distinction of those currently not incarcerated for a felony conviction are all those that are still able to vote, also not declared incompetent by a probate court or permanently disenfranchised for violating elections laws. For our purposes here, we're just focusing on the people either incarcerated in jail or are being held pre-trial. and also some eligibility and residency requirements. Again, those convicted of felonies, they have their right to vote reinstated once they leave prison. However, they can't vote while they're incarcerated. And for those in jails, they are able to use that jail location's address as their voting residency. This will become important later in when we start talking about filling out forms and actually getting people registered. But it's important to note that individuals can claim the jail location as their place of residency while they're currently incarcerated. Oh, hang on, I skipped a little bit here. Okay. And then finally, here's some Ohio rules on who and how voter registration drives can operate. There are a couple questions here. Do we have to, do we have to register with the state in order to do a voter registration drive? And is it mandated that they have any sort of training requirements? Both of those answers are no. However, as we'll begin to get into the more meat of the presentation, we'll see here that though it's not required, it would probably be best practice to contact your county jail or your multi-county jail if you're from a more rural part of the state, and just kind of let them know what your intentions are. You'd like to start putting together a voter registration / absentee voting program at the jail. What are their requirements, and so on. And then also for training, it's good to kind of have a base set of knowledge for all your volunteers that you can all give them a base level of knowledge of what the expectations are before you actually step foot in the jail to do this. You are able to use pre-filled applications. I would highly suggest not doing that, because we see when we're in these jails that individuals and inmates' circumstances are all different. Some may be released soon prior to the election, so they, just want to request a normal absentee ballot. Maybe they want to register at the jail and not their home address. So there's a lot of variables that we want to maintain enough flexibility when filling out these forms, that I would personally say try to stay away from pre-filled forms, even though it may give your wrist a little bit of a workout having to fill out all the boxes. Same thing with how do you obtain a voter registration application? Technically, you can obtain these forms at a number of local agencies, including obviously your county board of elections. You can also do it at your county Department of Jobs and Family Services. You can do it at a deputy registrar's office like your BMV, or you can get one from a public high school, your county treasurer's office, a number of places. However, again, I would highly recommend getting these forms from your county board because there you'll be able to also pick up your absentee ballot applications, which come in a couple different forms, which again, we'll get to, but they will kind of serve as that one-stop shop to where you'll be able to go there, you'll get the registration and absentee ballot forms that you'll need. Can people that go in to register these folks, can they be paid or compensated? Technically, again, yes, they can. I don't think this is something that we're going to really come across because I know this is a lot of volunteer-based work. But technically, if you come across some funding and you wanted to make this a robust program, just know that people that are collecting these registrations are able to get compensated. However, it cannot be on a per registration or per signature basis. It has to be in an hourly phase or, kind of a salary, like you just make a flat rate for the day. Again, I try to stay away from that as much as possible, just because, it just kind of is inviting some potential headaches in the future. Voters may not be compensated. That is strictly prohibited in Ohio law. It's their choice whether to register freely. We can only provide them that opportunity. And finally, do voters do voter registrants have to sign those forms? Again, if they can, they should. But if they're physically unable to, those registering voters are able to sign for them. However, again, try to stay away from it as much as possible because we don't want any shenanigans, if you will, going on with determining the validity of people's registrations. But there is that option if a prospective voter simply can't. And so here we're going to get into just kind of some best practices and things to keep in mind as you start formulating your campaign with any sort of fellow volunteers or any people in your community who'd like to join this work. So the first thing you want to do is kind of do your organizational prep. Determine who all wants to be involved, assign leadership roles, give people some empowerment over the process, prepare training materials such as going to the ACLU of Ohio's website where you can download and print out all of our jail voter organizer checklist. We also have some one-pagers on deciphering the Secretary of State's registration and absentee ballot forms. So it's good to have some information for your volunteers before they, again, actually go into the jail and execute this program. You also want to create kind of a working timeline. It all depends on the circumstances, but we need to make sure we know when voter registration applications have to be submitted to the board in order for them to be eligible. We have to know when, we have to keep in mind the absentee ballot request deadlines and things like that. So it's good to keep a timeline in front of you as you're doing this. And this timeline also comes in handy when you are reaching out to your county board, to your county jail, to give them a better idea of what your timeline is in terms of when you're going to go in, when you want to, begin this process. And step 4 is exactly what we're doing here. We're talking about learning how to foster these relationships. It's no secret, and it should come to no surprise that individuals, will be more likely to go out of their way to help folks if they know them personally, if they have a relationship, which is why we're here in the beginning to really, focus in on honing and nurturing this relationship between our Board of Elections teams and the boards of elections themselves. We want to reach out to the county boards and identify whom in their office typically does jail outreach. Do they have a existing program? Do they have a contact in the jail who that they typically talk to? Do they work with the public defender's office or their office of reentry? These are all kind of conversations that we should be having with our county boards just to get a better understanding again of what process is already in place. There's no need to reinvent the wheel. And if it's going to make your job and your lives easier physically getting in there, I always would suggest having those conversations. You'll want to talk to the jail about doing any sort of background checks for any volunteers that will need to be entered. You want to get an understanding of what is and is not considered contraband. So what you can and can't bring into the jail. Some things can be tricky, whether or not packets can have paper clips or things like that. Always good to have that information. And again, it's just another sign of good faith to the jail administrators, to the boards of elections, that we just want to get people registered to vote. We just want to make sure that they have the ability and the opportunity to exercise their fundamental right. There's no other business going on here. And then obviously you can, get your forms, get your registration forms, absentee ballot applications, and so on. Then you want to, work with your jail administrator, determine when they would like people to come in. There may be a time of the year where they have, it just works better for them in their schedule. And also, other things as if, tell the BOE that, you do want to get in here. Maybe they'd have a couple of officials that would like to accompany you, and just kind of make sure everybody's on the same page moving forward. Again, I just want to reiterate, I know I'm kind of going through this quickly and there's a lot here. So please do bookmark the link to the ACLU of Ohio jail voting page where you'll be able to find all these evergreen documents. So now that you have your campaign plan in place, or you're beginning to formulate it, Now we need to start talking about a little bit more of the actual operationalization, sorry, that's a tongue twister, of this campaign drive. So again, these are questions you'd be having with your county BOE and your jail administrator, asking them what kind of procedures are already in place. If they do go into the jail, when do they do it to register or to distribute absentee ballots? Is it 30 days, 10 days, 5 days? Again, this will help inform your timeline for your program. Do they hold on to registrations? You know, if an inmate is being held pre-trial, or I guess I should say a person is being detained pre-trial, will they hold off on submitting this person's registration in the anticipation that they are convicted? Just kind of getting some more clarity around that. How are these registration forms cured? Who will know? How will a person be informed if they need to correct something on the form? Is that something you can assist with? You know, if there are people that were homeless prior to detention, you know, what address should we use? We can use the jail address. However, if they say they use a particular shelter frequently at their, you know, prior to incarceration, can we use that as their voting address? And also smaller things such as the bullet from the second from the bottom. You know, what color ink are inmates and detainees allowed to use to fill out these forms? State law, certain aspects of state law do require blue or black ink. Do jails only allow pencils? You know, are we willing to make an exception on this front? You know, kind of, you know, it's something that may not seem, you know, important to really jump to the front of your mind when you're starting to put together these programs. But, you know, there are things in jail settings and incarcerated settings that need to be considered. And I think if you were to come forward with these considerations to your jail administrator, to your board of elections, it's just, again, another kind of olive branch extended saying, you know, we want to do this right. We want to make sure that we're honoring any procedure or process and making sure everybody is on the up and up. And again, you'll have questions for your jail administrator. Do they have a written policy on how this happens? Is it available? Are there voting signs around the jail so people know what deadlines they are? Are you able to, you know, what procedures or background checks are needed for your volunteers to get into the jail? A number of other things, but always having that initial conversation with your jail administrators, again, extending that olive branch and just making sure that nothing gets in the way of the mission here of serving these voters. And this will also help if you are, you know, when you're going in to have these conversations, have documentation, you know, written laws of how voters are able to exercise their vote while they're incarcerated, have a clearly identified ask. We want to make sure all voters have the opportunity to register, and give your boards of elections and your jail administrators your proposed timeline and your campaign plan. You know, we want to be in there 3 weekends in a row in August. That's when we want to do our voter registration drive. And then we'll come back at the beginning of early vote to do absentee ballots. You know, that kind of open communication and just kind of disclosure of your goal and your goals and your group's agenda. Okay, and now during the drive, once you've had these conversations and you've agreed with your boards of elections and with your jail administrators, this is kind of again, best practice as to what actually do when you're in the jail itself. Oh, I'm sorry, I jumped ahead of myself. These are going to be process models as we have here, just kind of how these voter registration and absentee ballot drives can take shape, and then some kind of pros and cons of each. So the first process model is that the county board actually conducts the registration, and the advocates, you know, volunteers monitor the process. This can be good in ways because it means the county board is actually being proactive in this scenario. They're able to have a much more open line of communication with the jail and with the county board. And also there's ability for better data collection, how many people registered to vote, how many people requested absentee ballots. That data will be much more readily available using this model. The con to this model is we really don't have any control in the process. The execution of the registration drive and campaign is solely on the shoulders of the county board and the jail administrators. And, you know, if I'm being frank, a lot of jails and a lot of boards of elections have lackluster reputations when it comes to this. So that's a con that we have for this model. The second model is advocates register the detainees, but with help from the county board. Again, this is good because volunteers, you will have more control over the process. You have a less reliability on your local county board who, you know, are doing a number of other things and are at the kind of, you know, at the mercy of any unexpected events that happen that they would need to drop, you know, and tend to. But there's also, you know, some downsides here, which can be that the jail will now be dealing with volunteers instead of another county agency. So there could be an opportunity for fall off in terms of, you know, the execution of the program. There could be kind of a lack of accountability because there's really no process in place for jails to hold to account. You know, you know, to maintain an appointment or a time slot for this registration drive to happen. So again, these are pros and cons that each group is going to have to weigh independently and determine what's best for them and for their county board and for their county jail. The third model is for advocates to run the process wholly. That is the most preferred because we have the most control again over the process and the most interaction with the detainees. This is also obviously the most labor intensive option for our BOE teams. It does take, you know, a couple, you know, at least a few times to get into the jail to make sure that you can reach everybody. And it just takes a lot of follow-up. So again, if you have a very dedicated base of volunteers that are ready to roll up their sleeves and get in there, I would obviously recommend Model 3 if it's available and if your county board and your jail administrators, you know, are amenable and agree to that. And fourth, the model, which we try not to rely on, though sometimes our volunteers' hands are tied, is for the jail officials to conduct the registration drive. Obviously, this means that volunteers and advocates have no control over the process. We don't know how thorough they're being. We don't know how, you know, supportive they are being in terms of making sure that the right information is going on the forms, making sure that the requirements are being fulfilled. And also there's kind of a lack of trust there between detainees and jail administrators. You know, we've seen in our working in jails that corrections officers and detainees typically have an adversarial relationship. I don't think that's hard to imagine. So that really hurts the participation factor. You know, people are going to be less likely to participate in the program if they don't think that, you know, if they think there's a chance that something nefarious could happen. I'll say that. But also, you know, there's the option that your county board could designate your county jail as a polling place. That's you know, I haven't heard of that happening too frequently, but that is a possibility. The county board does have the ability to do that. However, that again is going to be left up to your county board to decide that, because that will put an extra strain on their resources and manpower during the early vote and election day process. So move on. Okay, so again, just kind of some steps to keep in mind as you begin entering the jail to do your drive is to try to break up into smaller groups. You'll be able to, you can have several different stations registering voters at once, and you would be able to, just service more individuals quicker. You want to ask for a corrections officer to be your chaperone or somebody who just accompanies you during your stay there. Obviously, that's for the best for the safety of the volunteers and everything, but also, allows the jail administrators to have, some direct concrete control in the situation, which they appreciate and which frankly they would probably expect and demand. You want to make sure that you're following the correction officer's directions at all times, where to stand, where to walk, what doorways do you go into and out of, things like that. Kind of keep the number of detainees that you're processing to a lower level, maintain some aspect of privacy. We are asking these individuals to give personal information over, including, last four of social security number, perhaps their driver's license or state ID number as well. So we want to try to maintain an acceptable level of privacy, though we know it's not going to be perfect and what we would aspire for. You'll want to ask whether or not we'll be registering folks, in their group pods or in a common area. This could alter your ability and the time in which you'll be in there. So it's good to think about that. And then also trying to map out, due to the population of the jail, how many tries and how many days you would be in for your registration drive. A lot of times jails will allot an hour to 2 hours for these drives to occur. And unfortunately, the jail population in a lot of areas of the state is so large that it's just not possible to get everybody done in one try. So it'd be good to have that conversation ahead of time, let them know that if we don't get as many, if we don't meet our goal of giving the opportunity to register every eligible voter, that we want to make sure that we make time to come back in the following week or the following weeks, depending upon what works best for your volunteers and for your campaign. We want to absolutely double check to make sure all of our forms are filled out accurately. We know that the curing process is not going to be as accessible as it would be for you or I. Obviously, we want to try to limit as much back and forth as possible between the county board and the folks detained. And also, and this is another very important point, we want to make sure that we're filling out the correct absentee ballot form. You'll see here in step 9, there are 2 forms here at issue. That's complete form 11A, which is the traditional absentee ballot application that you or I would fill out. And then there's 11F, which is the form filled out for those whom are confined due to physical disability, ailment, infirmity, or incarceration. There are a couple pros and cons to those forms, and I'm just going to walk you through it. And again, all this information is on the website if you wanted to go back and look at it later. I would only recommend using the 11A form, the form you and I use when we fill out an absentee ballot. I would only recommend using that form if the individual is going to be released prior to election day. If they're not going to be released prior to election day, I would highly recommend having them fill out form 11F, because 1, that allows them to claim the jail as their voting residence, and also would allow for the county board to come and administer their absentee ballots in person in the bipartisan team of 2. And that again would really, in my opinion, it would really help these voters follow through and cast their ballot without them having to pay for their own postage to mail a ballot out of the jail. We all know that financially, persons incarcerated, that's a very tough, obstacle for them to face. Many times in jail, their entire personal allotment is spent toward food or clothing or hygiene products. So if we can save them any expense to pay for postage, I would recommend that we do that. And then obviously we want to make sure that we are submitting these absentee ballot requests at the appropriate timeline. And then we want to follow up with the Board of Elections to determine if they're going to be mailed or what day elections officials will be going in to administer the absentee ballots. And then obviously the returning the ballot. Obviously, as I said, the preferred goal would be to fill out the 11F. So the county boards of elections officials come in, they fill out their ballot, they give it back to the county elections officials, and they return them back to the board. But if that is not the case, and they just filled out the traditional absentee ballot form, make sure that they know that that ballot has to be postmarked, by a certain date, and that it has to be received by the county board no later than 10 days following the election. That's pretty much it. Like I said, I know that that's a lot of information, but I'm more than happy to answer any questions anyone may have.
Thank you so much, Collin. I know that we will definitely have questions, and I'm sure there are people here who've had a lot of experience with this who may want to share some of their experiences. I just want to reiterate the 11F. So the 11F is basically a form which means the Board of Elections comes to you. So you're confined. It's like being in hospital. You can't get to the Board of Elections, so the Board of Elections comes to you. You fill out the form, and then they actually show up, you vote your ballot, and then they take the ballot away with them. So really, that is definitely the form that you want to use. And if someone will no longer be incarcerated during election day, then they could, as long as they're registered, they don't need to vote by absentee ballot. They can actually vote, they can if they want, but that's not required. So, and Antoinette is asking, is someone eligible if they have committed a felony and have been released on parole? Yes, probation, parole, and awaiting sentence. You are eligible to vote any of those times. The only time that you're not is if you're serving, you're incarcerated, serving your sentence, or as Collin mentioned, if you are having to check in at the jail morning and evening, etc. So if you're out, probation, parole, or if you're just awaiting sentencing, it was kind of an interesting thing that came up with Lucas Count, Stark, that an issue where people, as soon as they were convicted, were being removed from the rolls. But actually, there's a period where you have been convicted, but you're awaiting sentencing and you aren't actually incarcerated yet, and you are technically still able to vote during that time. So it's only when you're incarcerated for a felony. Okay, I know there's questions, and I just want to reiterate, this is really different, county to county, and you're definitely going to want to get the experience of anyone who has been doing jail voting in your county. And we also have with the Ohio Voter Rights Coalition, the OVRC, there's a pretty active subcommittee on jail voting. And so, if you were going to start up a program, you might want to check in with ACLU Claytor, who would be able to put you in touch with anybody who's actively working on that in your county. Barb.
So am I understanding this correctly? When we get around to going into the jail, we need to take both the LA or 11A and 11F, and then depending on if they're going to be out, we use whichever form. We did this last fall, and we didn't know about the 11F at the time. So
I personally would just bring the 11F, but you can bring the 11A, but that's for people who are going to be out already. If they're going to be in, then they want the 11F.
But they could ask if they want to vote absentee, right?
Yeah, definitely.
okay.
The big reason that the 11F form is so critical is because that's the form that you can request the workers of the Board of Election to come to the jail and save them that time. And, we talk about postage for, quote unquote, normal voters. being a burden. It's even more so, 10 times so, 100 times more so for those incarcerated who literally had to spend their own money to buy toothpaste, soap, socks, underwear, food at the jail. So, we really want to try to, show them the upside to why it's in their interest to fill out the 11F form.
So what happens if I take 11Fs and we get people to fill them out, and then that person happens to get released from the jail before election day or whenever the board's coming? What happens to him or her?
Well, I believe, and I would need to double check on this, but I believe they would be able to just submit another absentee ballot request. I think the first one would be spoiled because you're allowed one kind of like, get out of jail free card in terms of like submitting a second request. But again, that's why it's so critical to like kind of, have an understanding of the individual detainee's circumstances. They know exactly when they're getting out. They know for sure. And that's when you walk in, it's like, it's okay. Are you going to be here for a week, or are you here for like, another 90 days? Those kind of conversations are very important to have, because that will wholly depend upon what form they should fill out.
Thank you.
I'm concerned about a comment that you made about someone has requested an absentee ballot, and then if they get released, they can just go vote. If that ballot has been mailed, it will show up that they voted absentee, whether they voted or not. So you can't, you have to be careful that people understand, if they request an absentee ballot, that is the way they will have to vote.
I think that, Camille, I'll call on Camille to answer that. But in theory, you could vote provisionally. That as long as you're not going to return that absentee ballot, if they know that it hasn't been returned, then you could vote provisionally. But
well,
Camille?
The most recent policy is that if you go in and you vote provisionally, you're still going to be responsible for returning that absentee ballot. Every absentee ballot has to be accounted for by a board of election, every one.
So in 2020, in this last election, the policy was that folks who requested an absentee ballot and then no longer wanted to vote it were able to go to the Board of Elections, the early in-person center, and asked to vote in person. The election officials, the workers there, were to ask if they had their ballot to sort of void on right there. But if they didn't have it, it didn't disqualify them from voting early in person with a regular ballot. They were just supposed to ask. So that was actually in a directive.
Right, but that's in the in-person voting at the Board of Elections. But I'm talking about a voter who shows up at a precinct.
Sure. Yeah, they'd be voting provisionally. They would have an A by their name and they would be voting provisionally.
And again, they're going to be asked to account for that absentee ballot before their provisional ballot is counted.
Hey, Ellen, I thank you for this. But the thing is they're just going to get asked. It doesn't prevent them from casting the vote from the ballot. That's the thing that confused a lot of people, poll workers and voters last time. Poll workers have to ask, but they will still get to vote.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But again, the issue is that provisional ballot going to count? If the Board of Elections cannot account for the absentee ballot, that provisional ballot will not count.
Well, Ellen, it's only if they cast the absentee ballot that the provisional ballot will not count, technically. So if someone gets asked, and this is for anyone, whether they're, incarcerated or not, they get asked, hey, did you vote? Did you vote your absentee ballot? No. Do you have your absentee ballot with you? No. You can vote again, and that provisional ballot will count as long as you didn't cast that other ballot.
That's right.
if I could just say in Franklin County, when we worked with them last election, if they brought the absentee ballot and the person was released, they marked it. Okay, so they brought the ballot back. They marked it on the records that they had, the person didn't vote the ballot. But just so that you know, that's Franklin County is phenomenal in their jail voting process. So just saying.
Okay, that's good to know. So if they actually had a bunch of ballots that they brought to the jail and then a certain number of them weren't there and they didn't get to vote it, then they went back and marked that. That's good to know. Lynn, you have your hand up.
Oops. Okay, I'm just a little confused because we, for the first time before the 2020 election, we went to the jail, and a lot of the inmates didn't know where they were going to be by
Right.
election time. So that was hard to I don't know what we do about that, you know? Like some of them said, well, my trial is going to be in a couple weeks. I don't know if I'm going to get convicted. Or other ones would say, well, I'm supposed to be getting out and, you know, but I may be here another month. So it makes it sort of, I don't know what we do with them.
Yeah, that is really tricky. I think that, you know, sometimes, like I know when I was, did this, the administrator person was very helpful in kind of saying, well, this person, you should do this, and this person, you should do that. I don't know, what do people recommend if you have someone who doesn't know whether they're going to be there or not? First of all, they're registering with a home address or with a shelter address. And then I guess I would, you know, they can wait and then request an absentee ballot a little bit, you know, later when they know better where they're going to be, is one suggestion. Or they can go ahead and fill out that 11F, and then if it turns out that they're out, go and vote provisionally in person on election day, you know, would be another option. Jen?
And if you have a lot of volunteers and you have a lot of folks in this, falling in this category, you could actually, you know, ask if you could go back into the facility and then help with their forms if they're still going to be there or not.
Maybe.
Other questions? I had a question, Colin. Something that we've come across a couple of times is there's some disagreement about whether or not folks are able to use the jail address. And so I would just be a little bit careful about that because for two reasons. Sometimes boards of elections reject that address. And then another, somebody just kind of highlighted to me recently that, you know how the Secretary of State can release everyone's addresses, you know, you can get everyone's addresses through Secretary of State from your registered address. If you're registered at the jail, then that's kind of a privacy concern. Like when you're going forward, people can kind of see that that's against your name. So if people have another option, like if they can register at a home address or a friend's address or a shelter address, that might be safer than using a jail address. I don't know if people, yeah.
Well, I guess I'll just start by saying this link in the chat right here is to section 3503.04 of the revised code, which is the exact section that says that those who are incarcerated or they're inmates of a public or private institution, they can use that residence or that location as their residence to vote, which again is critical for when you're bringing and you're having these conversations with the jail and with the Board of Election. This is a significant document to bring and say, hey, for people that, want to change their voting registration to the jail in order to, vote, more local, or if they are putting this on there for their mailing address, like this is a legal form or legal residency for them to use. Maybe I guess I would just kind of double down and hold their feet to the fire on that. That's part of the revised code. It's a, it's just a fact that they can use that form or that location as their residence, and you just have to press them on it.
And I think a couple
Okay.
things. One is that's why this local state organizational partnership is so critical. So that if there are moments in time that on any given issue where we're interpreting the law differently than what practitioners are on the ground, we're here to support you. And it could be that at that point, they get a call from ACLU or State League or Camille, or actually a formal letter. The other thing I would just say is I totally get the privacy thing, but a lot of jails actually that's already public. So I guess what I would say is I respect that. But if that makes the difference between someone voting or not, then I think maybe they should vote, because a lot of times you can get that information anyway. I sadly have had a certain individual in my life who's been in a lot of jails in a lot of counties in Ohio, and you can generally get that anyway.
Yeah, I think it's great that you can use the address, because I didn't know that, and I think that's excellent. And I was just promoting that the other day in a meeting, and somebody kind of came back at me with that other thing. So, I mean, it's something maybe to mention to the person, but certainly we want them to register rather than not register, for sure. And I do think that people should know that once you're registered to vote, changing your address is really very easy. So, you don't need to worry that you're stuck with that address forever. Other questions? And
Up on the, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, Mia.
no, go ahead.
I mean, we're coming up on the hour. And
Yeah.
so, part of this whole concept is that we're going to present something and then talk about it. And sometimes it might not take as long to present, and no complaints at all, Collin, because that was brilliant and exactly, I think, what was needed. What would you want for the next conversation? What are our ideas? And then we will work on our folks to figure that out.
And just to say that our next conversation is Thursday, May 6th. So it's actually just 2 days after the primary. So we may do some debrief.
And we could just do that. Quite frankly, if we wanted to just do a debrief, I think that would be fine. But it looks like Julie might have an idea.
Julie always takes a while to get unmuted, but in Licking County, we have a big anti-stigma steps of change event that's put on annually by people in the recovery community, mothers of addicts, so on. And that's May 15th. And one of the, we're in a discussion now about, we don't need a League of Women Voters table to register people to vote, frankly, Jen. We need a table that encourages people why vote. What's the relationship between addiction recovery and voting, especially since we've got we've got local elections coming up. So I would love to get that on people's radar and talk about that. I mean, obviously, this session is right on about all the technical issues about people that are, locked up in and out of jails because of drug offenses. And that what I understand from the recovery community is that becoming a worthy citizen involves voting. And I understand that's complicated to do at a 2-hour window at a in-person event. But that's a conversation I'd love to have, and that relates to this one. And I think obviously we want to debrief about the primary, but at least in my county, that only involves 8 townships, and it's not, the primary is not a big deal for us anyway. So that's my thought.
Julie, what's the date and time for your event?
It's May 15th, and there's a 5K run. There's there are a lot of different things. I'm not sure what time that tabling will be, but it's a Saturday. And every year it's called Steps of Change, and people bring gently used shoes that represent the shoes of people lost to accidental overdoses or to diseases related to addiction.
So I think we don't want to spend much more time here on that, but I think that's so beautiful and so cool. And I kind of wonder about, yeah, speakers could be cool, but I also wonder about some sort of interactive kind of like what voting means to you or why you vote, like almost more like a peer-to-peer conversation through an interactive like display board or something, you know?
Absolutely. They build it as fun for the whole family, games. And of course, I'm thinking educational games. So I think we're on the same wavelength here, Jen. And I'm sure this is happening all over the state, especially in our semi-rural counties, which Lincoln County is, where addiction is a huge issue and there's a lot of stigma, and people want to both celebrate and, want to celebrate the lives lost, as strange as it is, and also encourage people to move forward and develop a sense of self-worth. So it doesn't have to be for the next one, but since you said May 6th and the event is May 15th, it would be perfect timing for us.
Well, it could be that there's a little bit of a conversation about tabling, right? And just how, like the kinds of things that you might do at events, and different kinds of events and different ideas, whether it's activities or, different things. Maybe we could mess with that, Mia.
That actually would be good because Mia and I tabled at the Ohio State Fair a few years ago, and people look the other way. I mean, they do not, there are a lot of people that do not want to be harassed by the League of Women Voters, which was that table.
Okay.
And
we have a lot of, I know you've worked with us on, why vote materials and we're working on another one now. So I think that's always important stuff. But I think the main thing is getting authentic people to talk to their peers. And, honestly, like when you looked at the campaign in Florida for restoration of voting rights, and the people who were running that campaign, and the authenticity with which they could speak about the importance of that, honestly, I would say that was probably the key.
And we certainly have those people. I mean, that's where I learned how important the civic engagement is to recovery. That it's real. I don't want to spend a lot of time now, but I was sparked by the timing.
Yeah, definitely.
And also, the voting registration is not the place to start in a lot of communities when you're tabling. You have to convince people to want to vote.
Yeah.
And understand what it has to do with their life and the event.
Yeah. Well, okay, so we can do a combination of things next time, and we will send, I probably won't send it, I definitely won't send it today. I might not even send it tomorrow, but eventually I'll send a link with information about the next meeting and Colin's slides and this recording. So thank you guys so much. And we're also going to put you in touch with other people from your county who are active. So thanks, Collin. Much appreciated. Thank you, Camille.
Great job. Great
Thanks,
job.
Collin. Thanks, Collin.